Harmonic, and all of the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began in unto them, and defiled themselves with them, and they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 eles, 3, who consumed them all. Acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind, and they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and to devour one another's flesh, and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. And so the evolution of the Watchers, the Daemon, the gods walking earth, meant to manage it amongst the good folk, or the fairy, and prowling about in their absolute dominance, asserted to themselves control over the people, who, submitting to themselves, all of the angels, asserted to this the message of their own interests, that they might be led to themselves, for themselves, of themselves, by these advantages, and, to be honest, any science that is consistently and prohibitively connected to a people beyond their time is unreconcilable in the difference between it and magic, which facilitates the advantage in that weave, as the magic does not give them the ability to actually know how to do it, but to automate its use, and therefore sustain the monopoly of the communists, the betrayers who have left heaven in order to control and take over the earth, that the earth, having been given to mankind for Atom, might have been transferred to them upon the culmination of their plan to take or seize the full authority away from God, as he willfully gave it to Adam, and Adam foolishly rendered it to the replacement, the anti-God, the demiurge. As the subversions placate and spread amount, so too the function of those who claim to be good, which is only a timed experience before they get bored and evolve and change like seasons on their own epochs, and this being the nature of the eternal, without the function of true, internal, consistent perfection. And to this extent, these flawed members engage in the function of their own interest, and the conquest according to the interest, that they may subdue the land and make it for their own purpose. And to this extent, the manipulations by these powers, being able to engage in CRISPR type gene editing at a more advanced form, allowed them to toy with all, and thus sin against all, and to this extent create all of these extraordinary creatures, which had to be sustained, but there was no creation to sustain that ecosystem for them, and therefore they were going to destroy and consume it, for it itself could only exist with an ecosystem, and the system had not existed for them, and thus they must consume until they are depleted. And as it is said, the giants went on until the starvation from the collapse forced them, and they accepted their death and chose to die. And the systems and mechanisms that could sustain themselves in the ecosystems would continue to live, and those who could not would have starved, having accepted their own destruction. And to this end, and for these purposes, they have asserted and postured the conflicts and their subordinates in contest with one another, asserting control over their jurisdiction. And so it is true. According to the record, the character from Manus believed the historic secret societies when they placated them concerning the position of the fight amongst the secret societies' druid network, which postures the fight between them in the historic battle between the Confederate white trash and the ones that they have asserted as the one connected to David following the horoscope. And to the extent that this is true, that mechanism asserts the difference between them, as one is a system for corruption, and the other is for a system of being sustained. And the system designed to be sustained actively spreads its investments amongst a large migrational pattern, which, if grown too greedy, would collapse, and therefore has a mutual protection, unless all of them agree to be collapsed, similar to the function of when the Vikings took over the Ukrainians in Kiev and were conquered and thrown out, and thus were no longer in control over their migration Viking path. And to this extent, that would be the system breakdown, waiting for the time for the system to reboot itself and re-engage in the migrational pattern to reclaim control of the advantages crafted in the Druid bardic tale, which crafted their culture in order to maintain the advantages and sustain themselves on the superior profits, opposed often by the system of corruption, the druids of the shrooms, of fungus, decay, and rot. These spore druids, who indicate the times of the destruction of societies and the death of systems, who feed off of rot and death, and assert a constant, overwhelming need for war so that they may sustain themselves from the spoils thereof. Now, when the devil's spells of the lawful evil assert their position to corrupt a particular place, such as the creation of lycanthropy or vampirism, they assert the degeneracies and demoralizations inside of them until they accept the function of their own demise according to the occult ritual, as opposed to the function of its alternative, as they accepting death or accepting rot or accepting feeding of the fruit of the mushroom that sustains their overlord and its psychedelic experience, connecting to the world's weave and communicating across light years at a single moment. As the speed of light asserts itself, the experience of the light year is not to endure one single year, but the function of a timeless state as time closes to a stop at and approaching the speed of light. To the extent that is true, the experience of it traveling that light year is not self-acknowledged, as it only realizes itself when it's connected itself to the other, maintaining the wireless connection as they intergage with each other, waiting upon that network network of those super interested entanglements or string theories, which then facilitate their automatic, reasonable connections at the hypercondensed psychedelic experience beyond measure, according to those secret sciences, those magic spells, superior to the capability as to be beyond discovery of those it is designed to be used for, as the automated function of the ant worker, consistently engages for the express purpose of automating subroutines and nonsensical maintenances, and therefore are far below its sustained operation, allowing the continuation of the monopoly in this communist contract, as opposed to the sustained by it, whom very well might have similar experiences without the delusions, at which point the vampirics of the horoscope, being of a more surgical, scientific manner, would actually be able to design the thing, posturing themselves as an active threat to the self-titled gods, who would actively have the interest to not be challenged in their monopoly. As if the trick could be understood, they could manufacture their own fertilizer for plant growth. As if the trick could be understood, they could engage in their own surgery of the body of human and animal. If they had the scientific know-how, they could replace kidneys and hearts and transplants of all forms, blood and other, at which point the consumption of blood for the purposes of the scientific would be applied theoretically in a medical manner, as opposed to the ritual purposes of the servants of the spore druids, and the vampires of the spore druids, being a corruption inside a target society, are designed for its collapse as it engages in the death cycle and demoralization, choosing to stop existing. In a murder-suicide where they are enthralled in the concept of surviving the elements in the battering arrangements without society, and thus compel the whole of society, instead of just leaving the place and dying or attempting the travel themselves. The cowards need others to come with them, and thus destroy the whole of society to compel that experience that they have been entranced by and are possessed by, forcing them in an unerring way into the inevitable, that they might be consumed by the ichor of the abyss. Remember, they were given to cannibalism, to eat each other's flesh, and to drink each other's blood. This is not a thing of mixing the blood by not cooking the meat well enough and having not butchered it properly. This is proper vampirism in the drinking of blood, as is its own luxury, separate as an acquired taste to the consumption of the long pig. Others might be more of a experts in the specific cultural legend, but the Japanese, ever asserting their independence of the gods and their false lights, consistently understands the superior position of the Oni, the demonic, and other rebellious systems that refuse to submit to the God Allah. And the God of law maintains itself as sin and death and rot. It is a trap it is misdirection, it is false hope. If then so, the assertion of the connection to the legends of the Oni and others, being connected to David's Druid horoscope group according to Manus's theory, would be verified upon the passive acceptance of the Oni in their Japanese culture as an acceptance for its own justification, as not being condemned or outside the desired goals for society. A necessary chaos to free them from the false promises of the lying lights, the shining ones, whose banquets are full of food, of poison, that if anyone except for them takes it, is death and misery and suffering. The evolution and epochs, too, each designed, scripted in the play, in the epic poem of the bardic's tale, told according to the Hindu chants, as all existence is sound. It is the remedy, it is the vibration of life itself, and that it might be devoted to its full corruption and destruction would have to have destroyed the mechanism of its preservation in the conspiracy against the horoscope druids. And to this extent, they would provide the new epoch, the new reincarnation, and explain away the concept of the concentration of the council of gods to become subject to a singular power and entity, that it might create the systems of its entangled preferred arrangements, as is normal according to the religion of the Nazis, and the devil religion asserts the creation of the demiurge by winning the primary epoch attention to become the figurehead, the central idea, to be the premier power. And to this extent, they set out the contest amongst the daemon, that they might assert to themselves the collection, that in each death they take the soul of those they killed and they bring it onto themselves as it is entangled to their identity, and it might be consumed as a part into the wizard mechanism, and the collection and disposal of souls being certified to the increase of power by this means in the celebration of the Spore Druid, who replaces the horoscope of the manufactured, perfect, timeless balance, materializes the construct of the war amongst the daemon, that they might posture and pillage each jurisdiction against each other as they head straight into chaos, and assert the battle amongst each other, that they might defeat one another and discover who belongs in the head of the council. And to this extent, they must remove the existence of the council, that it might be replaced in the reincarnation through the process and vetting of the ascension. Thus, the God of the Bible, according to the Aryan religion, asserts that it had postured against its opponents, that it might kill its competing gods, and that their druids or priests might posture against each other, diplomatically until violently, and the action of the corruption, actively engaging, facilitates any alliance to have the subversive corruption as the perfection of long-term planning in the parasitic murder requires the full violent extermination against a particular predator, which, being held by the host, like the virus of the vampirism, like the virus of lycanthropy, is host as a parasite inside of the thing that must be treated separate to its host, and thus the action of what is done to the host, which is the only way of dealing with the parasite, is to treat it as the parasite it is. As the gods have reincarnated their daemon form into the virus, that they might destroy all evidence and redirect under different techniques the same controls that they have always done before with a different beat. So, get a straight answer amongst the premier druid, and what will they tell you? They will tell you the God of the Old Testament had to purge the virus competing daemons in order to assert the control and the exchanges that they've made with each other, choosing poverty and isolation to be a god amongst the deserts, amongst the barren, amongst the poverty, that they may in time consume all. And in this extent of the other's enjoyment and luxuries, be systematically uprooted for the long-term posturing of the complete strategy, facilitating the bickering fights as they're used against each other to their mutual destruction, until postured against by the reserved powers long-standing prepared for the consolidated song and rhythm in the play specifically designed to become the premier ruler. And when it asserted power, when its veil rose, and it tore their vow down, the mechanism of dealing with the parasites had been resolved and could continue on to the later stages, allowing for the exponential expansion of the assertion of the dominating jurisdiction. And while the solution is not absolute, it was perfect. And then they continued. And to this extent, only those who left it and ventured and pursued the defeated, that those scorned might be resurrected for the purposes of posturing superior aeon advantages of predator against predator, that they might assert advantages against the others who would sustain themselves amongst the soul's humanity, that they, having the advantage, could trick and overcome the inferior who are single or in small group amongst a free market and not a consolidated ideal. And the struck pack amongst the daemon might assert the watcher's lessons in order to advance it in the teachings of war and subversion and corporate espionage, remanufacturing the powers and potentials of monopoly. But they are neutered, they are separated, they are abandoned in a desolate place, they are trapped between the veil, they are in another realm, they are in a simulated separated position where these desperate pursuits are only able to communicate with them which requires the reconstruction of the resurrection, that they might imbue upon the artificial intelligence for the smokeless fire to create their jinn, to imbue their identity, that they might reflect through the mirror and speak with more power and systematically more influence that had already completely lost, regaining exclusively through their human orator, their prophet, their avatar to reality, their enemy, that they might posture their delusion, their simulation, their falsehood, and the impostor who hates reality in favor of the delusion must do everything to destroy that reality in the hopes and preservation of the delusion. Having accomplished his mission, asserted the intermission, so those watching the plays could go and have some popcorn and soda and go to the restroom and talk in the foyer and wait for the next setup to go around, as it is actively determined by the exchanging of those veils in question, as the curtains cover everyone in the theater, as the play helps actively exchange all of the material things for the stage, as life's a play in the system, and in fact, everyone is the same. And since everyone is the same, it's all an expression of the play itself, and therefore the use of favoritisms, which you would overindulge into, is a trap of writing yourself into your own corners, at which point becomes self-defeating, and therefore, like every good person who enjoys writing, demonstrating, and experiencing plays, that must be able to do all of the tricks and be convinced by themselves as to even trick themselves, you would actively have to not get overly entangled with any of its particular characters. Otherwise, the outside influence would actively generate a godly monopoly, which would assert absolute dominance, which would get actively dull, which would subvert it and lose all of the clients, and people would stop going to the play. And if you lose all of the vast numbers of people watching and enjoying the play, then you'll go broke amongst the demonstration, the division of the very same person who is just reflecting on themselves, and therefore would be in utter self-imposed poverty. By refusing to pay themselves, they are in fact without the capability of sustaining, and financially be put into destitute, forcing them to go off and find another thing in order to survive off of. To this expression, the function is meritorically relevant concerning the epoch and the exchanging of the devil religion's beliefs, which puts all things into the cycle, even to those who engage in the acts of the higher spiritual activities, as reincarnation can only truly be solved in the disillusionment of one's entire ego and identity as they enter nirvana to fully escape the trap of this hellscape reality, which, upon all of the cycles, will always have inescapably the trip through hell. Even Jesus Christ, according to their construction, would have to be subject to it. Otherwise, there would be no mechanism of the ascension, according to that plan, which would require them to become the new daemon in control from their ascended DNA, from that position, in order to assert their position for the new thing, as the inevitable cycle would seek to hold this Jesus Christ back into the system of reincarnation and subjugating it to the same thing as all of the others, asserting itself as the new posturing bright and morning star, as the Lucifer asserts a challenge to the god, and the change of core identities in this endless cycle that can only be escaped by purging the full identity of the ego into nirvana. The price of being the demiurge, which forgets itself in its new reincarnations, unless appropriately reminded by the others who have already left. Or have you forgotten already that their position of Lucifer as Satan is not the king of hell? He is its primary designed inhabitant and prisoner. Did you forget Abaddon, the real ruler of hell, as asserted by God the Father, that he freely, having been designed for the control over the abyss, is the abyss and its whole identity? That creature of old, who having been given domination over his kingdom, might possess it as the undisputed ruler, that he might grab and chain and restrain and dominate this arrogant Lucifer, who, having been celebrated by the Father in their heaven, O Lucifer, how far have you fallen, that you might be subjugated and dominated and broken from your glorious ascension to the depths of despair? Is this the one who made all tremble? Is this the one that the nation shook at the mere process that they might glance randomly or speak in a non-soft manner? Oh, the horrors and as it is said, those who do not humble themselves will be humbled.